Chapter 1, Earth, Prologue. Survive. As he stood with blood, both his own and from various other beasts, covering his body, he only had one thought in his head. I need to survive. He strengthened his grip on his weapons and charged forwards. He appeared before the beast and slashed down, cutting a gash in its neck while the beast swung its paw at his head. He teleported behind the beast, and even while coughing up more blood, he kept stabbing and slashing. Survive. 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 As the single word repeated in an endless loop, he jumped on the back of the beast, which was already starting to become sluggish from blood loss. He stabbed down once again, however. His weapon broke on contact. Survive. 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 Even as he began losing his bearings from blood loss, he could only hear one word. He stuck his hands into the wound on the beast's neck and ripped it open, sinking his teeth into its raw flesh. Survive. 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 He clawed, bit, and ate, and with the last bit of reasoning he maintained, he used the broken weapon to stab into the gaping hole in the beast's neck. The beast fell to the floor, lifeless. As he began to lose consciousness, he saw a holographic screen appear before his eyes. Level up. First class obtained. I survived. As he drifted into unconsciousness, a smile began to form on his lips. 5 days earlier. Hospital bed. He was 17 years old, with shaggy black hair and amethyst eyes that looked almost. Mom? They had been living in a certain Korean novel, Mana Awakened in the World, Gates began. In a hospital somewhere in Los Angeles, a young man could be seen sitting patiently beside a hollow. Combined with his skinny build, he was someone who could have been extremely handsome if not for his unkempt condition. On the bed was a middle-aged woman with similar features, evidently his kin. It's been 6 years since the world changed, but I'm still okay. You don't have to worry. About anything, your son will make sure you can wake up and enjoy this new world as well. Just please fight on and stay alive. Although he hoped to get even the slightest twitch as a response, he knew it would be impossible. The young man continued having idle chatter with his mother as he thought back to the incident that's been coined as the World Awakening. At that time, while he was just a freshman in high school, the world completely changed, as if, opening, and a holographic screen showed up in front of the eyes of every human that outlined their status. Each individual was given a talent to start with, ranging from simple abilities like enhanced eyesight to insane fantasy stuff like pyrokinesis. Hell, there was even a story on the news about some guy who got raisin manipulation. And within this myriad of abilities, he awakened a spatial affinity with the skill short-distance teleportation. At first he was excited, thinking about intense battles and gaining great power, but the reality was quick to shoot him down. His ability only worked in the area 10 meters around himself, and his physical stats were insanely weak, leaving him tired after using his ability a couple of times. Due to this, he was never able to fight beasts and level up, only becoming level 5 through sheer coincidence and kill-stealing. To be honest, once he realized his own weakness, he never wanted to become a hunter and explore the mysterious gates. However, he was left without a choice. He had no useful skills for the changing world, but was in desperate need of money. When Mana awakened, not everything was fantastical and cool, as there were many people whose bodies couldn't adapt to the changing environment, leaving them hospitalized and comatose, his mother being one of them. There was no cure for this ailment yet, but even the cost for the hospital to simply keep the patient alive were thousands of dollars. So he persisted. He joined the Guild Association, which manages hunters, and became a member of a collection team for the guild his best friend was a part of, keeping him relatively safe from attacks. Sometimes, he'd act as a porter and steal a kill or two, but after his stunt was discovered, even that stopped being allowed. And like that, 6 years passed. He never made any progress and barely made enough money to support his mother. Mr. Damien? Mr. Damien Void. Suddenly he was snapped out of his thoughts by the call of a nurse. Sir, we need to take care of the patient now, so we would appreciate it if you could wait outside for a few moments. Since he knew of this routine from his countless visits over the past 6 years, he nodded and left the room. Damn. After that last raid, I haven't been able to get a job in a while, he thought to himself. If I don't manage to join another raid in the next week, I probably won't be able to afford to continue paying Mom's medical bills. No, I have to. No matter what, I won't stop paying those. Even if I have to move out of my apartment and live on the streets for a while, I still have to pay her bills. What am I even supposed to do with these weak-ass stats? Damien thought out loud as he decided to check his status. Status! As soon as he thought the word, a holographic screen popped up right in front of his eyes. Status. Damien Void. Human. Male. Age 17. Level 5. Classless. Experience value 0/100. Titles: Bearer of the Void Physique. Affinity: Space. Physique: Void Physique. Magic Power: 20 STR 3. Def 2 Int Dex 5. Skills: Short Distance Teleportation Level 1. Minor Telekinesis Level 1. Minor Regeneration Level 1. An exasperated sigh. All my problems could be solved easily if I could just get stronger, but my physique seems to be stuck at this pathetic level no matter how much I try to improve. He thought back to the times when he would try his hardest to work out, even going so far as to use the One Punch Man and solo leveling workout routines to improve his body, but to no avail. When he first awakened the system, he already had 2 titles. Thinking back to how much he bragged about it back in high school, he felt like crawling in a hole out of shame. As it turned out, his first title, which was only represented by a series of dots, was absolutely useless. At first, he thought it would be like one of those novel tropes where the title was too powerful and therefore sealed, but after 6 years he had given up that faint hope. His second title was even worse. It wasn't just useless, it was harmful. Instead of void physique being some kind of cheat power that granted him an easy understanding towards his spatial affinity, it just absorbed most of the nutrients and strength meant for his body like a black hole and converted it to magic power. Due to this, he had a good amount of magic power for someone at his level, but that was redundant when his body couldn't even handle the strain of teleporting too frequently. Even my spatial affinity is one of the rarest and most challenging affinities to train. After all these years of constant effort, the only thing I've managed to achieve is the ability to flow cups towards me, he thought as he sighed once more. Seriously, it would be nice if I had some plot armor or something. At least that would randomly give me a way to cure Mom, and then why would I need to care about being a hunter? I could just live the peaceful life an ordinary citizen with shit luck like me should be living. As his thoughts continued to get more and more self-deprecating, the nurses finished their procedures with his mother. He went back into the room to bid her farewell before leaving. Don't worry about this useless son of yours, Mother. All you need to do is keep living. I'm sorry I couldn't do more for you, and I'm sorry your son is so thin that he probably won't be able to get a girlfriend before you wake up. He chuckled slightly at his own joke as he continued. I'll be leaving now. I promise I'll bring you more stories of the gates and the crazy stuff that's happening in the world next time I come. I heard that even that guy with the raisin manipulation has become famous. One day, this son of yours will stand at the top of the world and make sure you can live any life you desire. After leaving those words, he left the hospital. On his way out the door, however, he was abruptly tackled to the floor. Damien? Chapter 2, Earth? Damien! Feeling the 2 soft mounds glued to his chest, Damien looked up and saw a beautiful girl around 17 years old. She had dark blue hair, matching eyes, and a body that had been refined over the years for combat. This was his closest friend, Elena Pierce. Geez, she said with a pout. You didn't even notice me waving at you. You must have been overthinking things again. You really need to get out of that habit. Damien was used to this behavior, though, so he just took her off of him and stood up while offering her a hand. So, what happened to get you so excited? And just like always, she pretended like nothing happened and took his hand to stand up. Well, the guild just got access to another gate, and it looks like it'll be a big one this time. It's only a B-rank gate, but the mana signature it's giving off is abnormal. And since I'll be going this time, I can be sure that you're safe if you come too. So what do you think? Damien nodded with gratitude. Although she tended to act like a mom around him sometimes, she always had his best interests in mind. Even when she found out about his mother, her first reaction was to help him pay, however. He refused since he didn't want to owe her anything. All right, I'll be there. Anyway, that's probably not why you're so happy though, right? Damien responded. After all the years they spent together, he had a pretty good grasp of her personality. Nope, I have some time off right now, so we can finally hang out, she said while she grabbed his hand and started dragging him away with a slight blush on her cheeks, though Damien failed to notice it. Fine, let's go. It's not like I have anything better to do. As Damien let himself get dragged, he thought back to when they first awakened. Although he was stuck with the short end of the stick, Elena had massive potential from the very beginning. Although she was supposed to be a healer, she loved to fight on the front lines, turning her into a combatant who could continuously heal herself and have everlasting stamina in combat. And after she got her first class, she became known as the War Priestess by the masses. She was someone who had the potential to reach even 4th class with enough work, so she was always favored by the guild. As he was lost in thought once again, Damien and Elena arrived at a cafe. After they ordered and sat down, Damien suddenly realized something. Hey, if the gate tomorrow is so abnormal, why are you asking someone as weak as me to come along? Elena pouted. Because if you come with me, I can at least look after you. Do you think I don't know that you've been getting injured all the time by going through a gate after the gate and overusing your skills? Damien averted his eyes, knowing she was right. Well, I guess it can't be helped. He was just recently losing his mind over trying to find a new gate so he could make some money, so he would be stupid to reject her offer. Besides, he had never been afraid to enter any gate, no matter its difficulty. His only fear is that there's nobody to take care of his mother if he dies. After all, his dad disappeared to God knows where around 10 years ago, and they had no other family that was still around. Time passed swiftly as Damien spent his day with Elena, They finished eating and visited an amusement park and spent the rest of the day there. Sometimes he wonders if these types of days that they have every so often can be considered as dates, but he quickly shook off the thought. He had to take care of his mother and make sure his life was still livable first and foremost. Besides, with her potential, she'd become a huge figure in the near future. He can't let himself be a burden to her for much longer. Walking back from the amusement park, Damien looked at Elena, who was jogging ahead of him and giggling like a child. He found this kind of scene refreshing since she only acted like this around him. When she's around her guildmates, she's always cold and has a fierce aura surrounding her, making her generally unapproachable. That's why he enjoys spending time like this, thinking that maybe she needs days where she can act like an ordinary girl instead of the guild's most promising fighter. Watching her, he thought back to their days in high school once again. He was naturally an outgoing person, but he was never able to make any friends. Even with his looks that should have made him popular, he had no luck. He was even bullied at one point in time by one of the other guys in the class. Perhaps it was jealousy, or maybe it was something else. Damien didn't know. What he did know was that meeting Elena was salvation for him. His dreary school life instantly brightened up as she became akin to a sun in his dark world. He really didn't know how to repay the gratitude he felt towards her. After saying goodbye to Elena, Damien headed back to his apartment and started preparing for the raid tomorrow. The following day, Damien grabbed his supplies and headed to the meeting spot in front of the gate. It was relatively early, but since he's weak, he decided it'd be better than risking being late. The world was slowly transforming into one where strength is king, and the law could no longer fully contain certain people. As he rode the bus, Damien felt his chest constricting as an ominous feeling rose within him. Although he had read enough novels to know that this kind of feeling isn't something to be ignored, he had no choice but to continue forward. After all, he's too weak to do anything about it even if things go wrong, and his most prided expertise is in fleeing. All he can do is hope that he's just imagining things and trust those on the front line. When Damien stepped off the bus, he was greeted by Elena, who seemed to have been waiting for him. "Hiei, I knew you'd show up early, so I came and waited. How is it? Surprised?" she said while jumping up and down. Damien smiled lightly and made idle chatter with her as they walked to the gate. Upon arriving, Damien noticed Elena's behavior revert to coldness, though she still held some warmth when she spoke to him. As he knew this was just her personality with the guild, he just sighed lightly and headed over to where the collection team was. "Yo, Damien, looks like you're here again, huh? Guess we'll be having an easy time in today's gate," called a burly middle-aged man. That skinny kid? Why are you acting like that?" his buddy questioned. "Haha, Pete, you haven't been on a raid with him before, that's why you don't know. Although he has one of the weakest bodies I've ever seen in a hunter, his collection speed is great." "Haha, Dave, if it's as you say, I guess we can just sit back and let the kid do all the work today." Damien just smiled and waved as he continued walking. Even if those stronger people and frontliners tended to look down on him and berate him for his weakness, those who were in his crew in the collection squad always held him in high regard. After all, his short-distance teleportation and minor telekinesis are both skills that excel in side jobs like this one. Those guys get to finish much faster when Damien is around and get to laze around for the rest of their shifts. Although Damien had just previously been hoping everything went without a hitch, he always considered himself someone with dogshit luck, and naturally, such luck needed to come into play at this moment. While he was preparing his equipment, an arrogant voice sounded from behind him. "You there, dirty kid? I need a porter, and you're coming with me to do it." Chapter 3, Earth. When Damien turned around, he saw a relatively handsome man in his late 20s with blonde hair and green eyes standing there haughtily. "No, I'm good. Find someone else to do it for you." Though he responded casually, he inwardly prayed that he wasn't dealing with an arrogant young master of some corporation. Sadly, his prayers weren't unanswered. "Who do you think you are, talking to me like that? I am Jin Horton, heir to the Horton conglomerate. If I say you do something, you do it," the arrogant man said. Damien sighed. The Horton conglomerate was one of the world's leading tech companies even after the influx of mana. They had more than enough power to ruin his life and the lives of those around him without any repercussions. As he sighed again, Damien followed the man. "I wonder what other fun my dogshit luck will bring me today." When Damien arrived at the area where the frontliners were gathered with Jin, he received looks of disdain from almost everyone, which he promptly ignored. Turning to look at Elena, who was barely hiding her surprise, he could only flash a helpless smile. "Listen up, people," Jin yelled. "I'm Jin Horton, and I'll be leading the expedition today." He paused, seemingly enjoying the shock on everyone's faces when they realized his background. "This gate was officially listed as a B-rank gate, but the boss will likely be a first-class beast. We need to proceed with utmost caution so we can close the gate successfully." As he spoke, Jin snuck several glances at Elena. Trying to impress her, however, she remained as stoic as usual. While Jin continued to give an overview of the raid plan, Damien looked at the gate in wonder. It was like a swirling vortex of deep blue attributeless mana that maintained its shape by assimilating the mana in its immediate surroundings. Gates usually sustain themselves like this. However, after all the mana in a radius of 50 meters from the gate is absorbed, it can no longer sustain itself and collapses. This collapse is usually just an implosion of mana that decimates the area around it, but in some cases it can lead to a dungeon break, where beasts use the moment the gate destabilizes to breach the barrier and arrive on Earth. These incidents, although rare, have led to many cities being decimated in the past. Therefore, the Guild Association made a rule where no gate is allowed to remain untouched for longer than 1 week. When Damien looked at this gate, he felt an undeniable attraction to its function. Slowly but surely, he got stuck in a trance staring at it. Although it's never expressly mentioned, these gates also make use of the spatial attribute to function. The suction force of the gate resembles my void body in some ways, by absorbing everything that's usually meant for different situations and repurposing it all to sustain itself. Damien realized. If my void body works on the same principle, what would happen if I consume more energy than the limit? Is that the way for me to strengthen myself? If so, how? He was abruptly woken up when he felt a powerful force kick him to the ground. Hey, worthless little shit, if you aren't going to listen to me, then what's the point of even having you here? Damien looked at Jin with hateful eyes but said nothing, swearing that one day he'll get strong enough to repay his grievances. As it turns out, Jin wasn't even saying anything meaningful. The only reason he even bothered to hit Damien was to maintain his superiority complex. Damien looked at the gate one more time before acting like he was paying attention to Jin's speech. However, he was still stuck thinking about his void body. A method to strengthen myself. Even if it's only in theory, it's still the first step forward I've taken in years. The question is, where am I going to find an energy source large enough to test my theory? He continued to ponder on this concept while letting Jin's words go in one ear and out the other until he finally finished his speech. Once everyone separated to prepare, Elena walked up to him. Hey, are you okay? That asshole is only leading this raid because of his background. If it wasn't for that, I swear I would have... Since it seemed like Elena would go on a rampage soon, Damien smiled lightly and patted her head. I'm okay, don't worry. If it wasn't for his family background, he wouldn't be shit, so why should I worry about him instead of thinking about how I can improve myself? Elena blushed but didn't stop him. Well, whatever. If that's what you think, then I'm fine too. Even as she tried to play it off, she put her hand on Damien's chest and began to heal him. Seeing this, Damien chuckled. Well, if you're done worrying about me, how about you go get yourself prepared for the raid? It would look bad if our friendly neighborhood war priestess was fumbling around, right? Elena's blush deepened at his tease, but since his words were partially correct, she scurried away to get ready. Damien watched her for a while before turning back to the gate, his expression becoming serious. That ominous feeling only got stronger once I got closer to the gate. Well, no matter. If it comes to the point where I need to flee, I'm confident I can get out, only... Damien looked towards Elena again. Even if I need to sustain some internal bleeding, I have to make sure she makes it out too. He'd mentioned before that she was his best friend, but it was more accurate to say she was his only friend. After that fateful day of awakening, when everybody got their powers, even social hierarchy went through a change. While those with useless powers were shunned to one group, those with stronger abilities gathered together, however, Damien could be said to be somewhere in the middle. He was ostracized by both sides, and the only one who had stuck with him was Elena. Thinking back, he couldn't help but feel grateful to her once again. Gathering his thoughts, he stood up and joined the attack squad. Deep within his eyes, an intense determination began burning. To keep himself safe, and to keep Elena safe, no matter the situation, and no matter the consequences. As his resolve grew firm, the space around his body started to distort. Whatever happened in this dungeon would be a new beginning for him. Whether it was a good or bad one, only time would tell. Chapter 4, Stranded. Expansive. The scenery inside the dungeon could best be described this way. When Damien entered the gate, all he could see was a huge cave system that spanned the distance of several miles, its end at a point he couldn't even see. Alright, folks. We should only be seeing first-class beasts that are at most level 20 around this floor, so be prepared to take them out. Even if they're weak, we still have to stay vigilant in case something unexpected happens. Once Jin gave the order, the team began moving, with Damien following at a slight distance behind them. As time passed, the raid continued without a hitch. With beasts being at the maximum of level 20, the attack squad, which is comprised of many first classes, whose levels average around 30, weren't having any issues, especially with Elena present. Whenever they met a beast that seemed like they would need to team up to kill, she would charge forward with her sword and start slashing in a seemingly reckless manner. After all, no matter how her fighting style was, its base principle was her ability to constantly heal herself and replenish stamina. With this, no beast near or even slightly above her level was her match. However, even with this assurance, the team continued forward vigilantly. The most dangerous aspect of weaker dungeons like this one wasn't always the beasts. Around 2 years after the World Awakening, When humanity was finally beginning to completely adapt to mana and the changes it brought, they discovered something that changed their entire viewpoint of its capabilities. When an advanced party from a nameless guild was exploring one of their dungeons, they came across other humanoid species. Naturally, they attempted communication before wantonly attacking and accidentally discovered that they were no longer speaking any languages that existed on Earth. As it turns out, the introduction of mana and the system that follows it grants all beings under its influence with a shared language. As the inhabitants of Earth use English as their universal language, this new language wasn't introduced until they came into contact with other intelligent species. This guild began speaking to the humanoid individuals. They learned that the dungeon they were in was actually connected to another world called Lahore. As other guilds also began meeting intelligent races in dungeons, they learned of the existence of countless other worlds. As it was explained by the denizens of some of those other worlds, gates are phenomena that only appear in worlds that are newly awakened to mana. After a world has adapted to and assimilated with mana, dungeons are structures that naturally spawn. However, a world that hasn't fully assimilated with mana doesn't have the structural integrity to hold constructs born from mana, such as dungeons, without collapsing. Due to this, gates appear in connected dungeons in various other worlds. In one dungeon, connected to a world called the Cloud Plane, Earthlings met humans that treat the system as something akin to the heavens, and rather than leveling up, they consider it as cultivation. Through these countless interactions with other world denizens, the citizens of Earth learn many things, especially the fact that these otherworld denizens are barred entry to Earth through the gates. It seemed to have something to do with the concept of balance. However, because humanity has only lived with mana and the system for 6 years, they weren't able to completely understand these more complex theories. Several hours passed, and the dungeon seemed to have been mostly cleared. The group decided to take a break before commencing their final sweep. During this break, Elena naturally went to Damien to check on him and chat for a while. In another area of the dungeon, Jin stood with a hateful look in his eyes. Damn it, that woman should be mine. Why does she keep looking at that trash instead of me? Throughout the entire time they were raiding the dungeon, Jin was constantly trying to show his strength and valor to impress Elena, but she acted like he didn't exist. As the only son of a wealthy and influential father, Jin was never treated with indifference like what Elena shows him. But that only makes me want her more. Jin looked over at Elena, who was chatting and laughing with Damien, showing a completely different personality than she did with others, as envy began to cloud his mind. Say, I get rid of that trash. If that hindrance is gone, then there's nothing stopping her from becoming my woman. He. Anything can happen inside a dungeon, right? If a weak porter dies because a beast just happens to break through the lines. His expression twisted as his thoughts continued, and a malevolent aura started to spread, only to be retracted immediately after. Damien, was it? Well, I guess I'll let you have her for now, since it'll be the last conversation you ever have. Meanwhile, Damien continued chatting and laughing with Elena, oblivious to the fact that he was being put to death by an arrogant young master. So? This dungeon seems to be pretty normal to me. I don't see why the signature it gave off was so weird. Elena pondered. Maybe it has multiple floors? If that's the case, then there's nothing to worry about since the gate will close once we clear this floor. But isn't that good news for you? You get more money for less work. Yeah. I guess so. Anyway, it looks like that asshole is gathering everyone up again, so you should probably head over. When the attack squad began gathering, however, a thunderous roar resounded through the cavern, as heavy footsteps approached the group. Fuck! Exclaimed Jin. Just from its aura, I can tell that it's probably a first class. Everyone get together and be ready to either fight or flee on my command. When the footsteps stopped, what was revealed was a massive tiger-like beast around 20 meters tall that had a fiery aura radiating from its body. It looks around level 50, a newly ascended second class. If we work together, we should be able to kill it, Jin yelled. Damien retreated many meters as to not get caught in the crossfire as he watched the attack squad get into formation. The squad comprised of 2 tankers, 2 healers, a mage, and 3 damage dealers, including Elena and Jin. The beast charged forward with a roar and shot flames from its mouth. As the tankers took the hit, the mage utilized his ice affinity to freeze the beast's paws. Elena and Jin charged. While Jin melded into the shadows and sliced at the beast's tendons and other sensitive areas with his twin daggers, Elena confronted it head-on. The tiger roared in anger and swung its paws at Elena, while she deftly dodged and slashed at its neck. Time passed as the squad slowly chipped away at the beast, making it accumulate various gashes and wounds. With Elena's ability, she was able to keep fighting even after most of the team had run out of mana or stamina. With the mage letting out occasional ice spikes as his mana replenished, and Jin limiting its movements by cutting its exposed tendons and ligaments. Around 15 minutes later, she managed to land a fatal hit, letting the beast drop to the floor. Dead. With the comprehensive planning and experience they had, the team managed to finish the fight without any unexpected circumstances and were promptly healed by the healers. As everyone began catching their breaths, the entire cave began to rumble. Everyone's faces immediately paled. The gate's closing! "We need to get out of here!" yelled one of the tankers as he ran with all his might. Everyone else soon followed, as even Damien had to continuously teleport to reach the gate. Being trapped in a dungeon usually meant death with no escape. Once the gate closes, there is no connection left to Earth. So even if one manages to escape the dungeon, they're trapped in a completely different world. As Damien ran, he looked around for Elena and noticed her falling behind. "Elena, what are you doing?" Damien yelled before abruptly realizing the situation. The gate closed out of nowhere, and as the one who did most of the work to kill the two ND-class beasts, she must have used most of her mana. Without being given time to rest, she was basically on the verge of fainting. "Fuck!" Damien cursed as he ran back to grab her. He put his arm around Elena's waist, which she subconsciously rejected before realizing it was him, then without pause began spamming his short-distance teleportation to flee. As the gate came into sight, Damien felt his mana draining at a rapid rate, and his body began to break down. His blood churned and leaked through his pores, but he kept going. He remembered his ominous feeling, and he remembered his resolve. And just as his internal organs were going to rupture, he made it out of the gate. As he set Elena on the ground, he smiled. Although it felt a bit anticlimactic, he was glad he managed to get both of them out of the gate without issues. And then, just as he was about to ask Elena, who had regained some vigor, how she was doing, he felt his body flying backward. Huh? Backward? What's going on? Damien thought as his mind failed to understand what caused such a bizarre situation. As reality sunk in, he began to panic. He knew that what was behind him was a gate that was on the verge of closing, but he had no means to save himself. His mana was overdrawn, his body was at its limit, and his consciousness was already weak. As he felt the mana current of the gate graze his back, the last thing he saw was Elena's horrified expression and a certain bastard smiling at him and waving. And then, everything went dark. Chapter 5. Stranded. Feeling an aching pain all over his body, Damien slowly opened his eyes, only to be greeted by cold hard stone in every direction. Huh? Where am I? Damien thought before he remembered the events that led to this point. Fuck! That arrogant bastard actually pushed me into the gate. I didn't do anything to... Before his thoughts could go too far, Damien heard a series of roars and screeches coming towards him. When he looked down, he realized that he was covered in blood, which must have attracted beasts. Coming to this realization, his face paled. He quickly got up, confirming that enough time had passed for him to regenerate from any major wounds, and ran. Damien was weak. He had spent the majority of his life after the world awakening fretting over his weakness, and now in this situation, his weakness became all the more apparent. He ran and ran, but the beasts naturally weren't only in one direction. Damien could only consider himself lucky that the beasts in the immediate surroundings of the gate had been wiped, or else he would have died before he even woke up. Fuck. What do I do? I can't fight, but I can't live without food. If I don't fight, I'll die, but if I fight, I'll also die. Damien panicked. Although he had plenty of experience inside gates, his level of combat experience was almost nil. He had probably stabbed a sword a couple of times when he stole kills to level up. Damien didn't know how long he ran, but it was long enough for the cries of beasts to fade into the distance. He approached the cave wall and sat down to rest his aching body. This amount of running could be considered the most physical exercise he's had in a very long time. As he sat with his back to the wall, he tried to calm his breathing and mind, but no matter what he tried, his thoughts wouldn't stop. I'll die. I'll really die. I can't do shit against beasts. I don't have a weapon. I don't have muscles. I don't have offensive skills. I have nothing. I don't know where this dungeon is. I don't know how far away Earth is, or if it's even in the same galaxy. What will happen to Mom when I'm not around? Pa. Damien slapped himself in the face. No, I can't give up yet. Even if she thinks I'm dead, it's fine. What I need to do now is survive. Survive and make it back to Earth. Make it back to Mom. Make it back to Elena. And make it back to drop a planet on that sick bastard's head or something. Thinking of that last point, Damien's blood boiled in a fury. Damien let all of Jin's antics slide because of his background. He had to endure because he had nothing. He ended up in this situation because he was weak. I have to get stronger. It doesn't matter what I have to do to reach that point. But I have to get strong enough to return. Though he was still in a panic over the situation, he knew that if he sat still and did nothing, his only outcome was death. He had always worked without fear beforehand, and now, even though the situation is much direr, all he needs to do is the same thing he always did. Survive. Damien, you must always remember. Although you are weak, you must forge a will to live, a will to achieve, and a will to survive. No matter the circumstance, and no matter the adversity, you must survive, because if you survive, and you fight, and you persevere through it all, one day you'll become someone that even the heavens must look up to. Damien thought back to his dad's last words before he disappeared to who knows where. Fuck. Why am I thinking about that bastard right now? But no matter how much he cursed his father, he could never bring himself to hate him. As he grew and thought back to his last memories of his father, He could feel the pain his father always hid from him and his mother. And thinking about his father's words and the situation he's in now, he could feel his father's resolve. Though he didn't know what that resolve was towards, it didn't matter anymore. Damn it. If that guy could talk all that martial master bullshit and forge such a resolve even before the world awakening happened, why should I pussy out here? I need to go back and cure Mom. I need to go back and check on Elena. I need to go back and pummel that arrogant asshole, and I need to find my father one day and punch him in the face. Damien began to forge his resolve. He had forgotten in his panic, but he hadn't died yet, and he still had plenty of things to do. As long as he hadn't died, he could still achieve what he wanted to achieve. As long as he hadn't died, just like his dad used to say, he's become someone even the heavens must look up to. It seemed like space itself had bore witness to his resolve, his declaration, as the space within a 25-meter radian started to twist and distort. Unfortunately, Damien was too deep in his thoughts to notice. He snapped his eyes open, and the space reverted to normal. Several hours had passed since Damien sat down to rest, but it seemed he was in a relatively secluded area, since no beast attacked him during his panic. Geez, I must be some kind of idiot to have a panic attack in this kind of life or death situation. How do those novel MCs even adapt shit like this happening so fast? Damien chuckled. Well, if I was a novel MC, my plot armor would have saved my mom by now and I'd get a random power boost to deal with this situation, but obviously that isn't happening. Damien stood up, his eyes having regained their clarity. He began to quietly run around the dungeon floor. No matter which world this dungeon is connected to, it has to have weapons, and someone had to have died in here before. There's no way our party was the first to ever explore it, and after what seemed like hours of running, he found what he was looking for, a pile of bones and a slightly rusted pair of short swords. I was kind of hoping for a spear, but short swords work too, Damien thought as he picked them up. They were entirely made of some type of black metal, and although the one of them was showing signs of cracking already, they were more than sharp enough to work as a temporary solution. Well then, let's get to hunting. Chapter 6, Survive. One day passed since then, and Damien could be seen crouching behind a rock with his short swords out. At the moment he was stalking his prey, which was a bunny. Even Damien thought it was extremely lame for him to hunt bunnies, but when he carelessly attempted to kill the first one, his only reward was a deep gash on his leg that still hadn't healed. Because of that, Damien started calling this species demon bunnies, and began using hit-and-run tactics using his teleportation to kill them while they were off guard. Now. And just like every time he hunted for the past day, he waited for his opportunity and teleported directly behind the bunny, stabbing his short swords down before he even teleported, instantly killing it. Another discovery he made was that his teleportation ability carried his momentum. Although he had no idea how that worked scientifically, old laws of science didn't apply to the new reality. Still, he did his best to use the old science he learned to justify his power. It was human instinct to try and define the unknown in terms one already has knowledge of. Using his bunny-killing method, he had already gained a level, but killing the same beast too many times significantly decreases the amount of experience earned, so he would have to move on to bigger prey soon. Grabbing the fresh bunny carcass, Damien went back to the cave he had found and set up residence in yesterday. He threw the body into the pile of other bodies and sat down. Today would be his second day going without food or water, but he was holding up relatively well due to the rich density of mana in the environment. Although he had 6 or 7 demon bunny corpses, he knew it would be stupid if he ate them as he is now. Beast mana is infused in their bodies to strengthen them, and is incompatible with humans, so it's usually impossible to eat beasts unless the carcasses are purified by a priest class or similar people. When the world first changed, there was a couple of cases of people trying to cook and eat beast meat. However, things didn't end well for them. Through further research, it was discovered that 99% of the time, people who ate non-purified beast meat had their bodies corrupted by the foreign mana and exploded. The other 1% of people mutated into demi-humans, but not the cute cat girl kind of that show up in the manga. Rather, they would have wolf heads and wolf paws with random tufts of fur jutting out from their bodies. These people also tended to lose most of their reasoning, becoming more animalistic and primal. Even knowing about these abysmal odds, Damien had a certain level of confidence in mutating successfully as long as he got stronger before he attempted it. Either way, he would have to eat the beast meat. He just decided to delay it to increase his chances. However, he could only last another day or two before he needs to eat. Once Damien got his thoughts in order, he thought back to the layout he made of the floor he's on. I don't know which floor this is, but it's definitely near the top. There are also only classless beasts on this floor since the rest were wiped out during the raid. Although it's frustrating, there's no way to go up or closer to the surface. There's only a single staircase that leads to the next floor. I can't gain much more from classless beasts unless I kill everything alive on this floor, but that'll drain my stamina to the point where I'll be forced to eat the beast meat and take my chances with mutation. As his thoughts followed this path, he made his decision. I already firmed my resolve. There's no more use in hesitating. If it means I can get stronger faster, I'll go down to the next floor. But first, he decided to rest. Among the classless beasts here, he could reign relatively supreme with his teleportation, so they don't usually disturb the area where he stays. What felt like a couple of hours later, Damien woke up feeling refreshed. Since it's only been around a day and a half since he got stranded, he still had a relative view of the time. When he got up, he looked at the pile of corpses he'd made and sighed. He didn't know if he'd be able to come back for these and felt it was a waste to save them. Okay, it's time to go. This will be my first time facing real danger in my life. With an increased sense of vigilance, Damien walked down the staircase leading to the next floor. When he reached what he had dubbed as the second floor, he was surprised to find that plants were growing here and there. Although it was mostly as desolate as the first floor, it still had a bit of spice. Damien was pleasantly surprised by this discovery after all. This meant that there was a possibility of there being a water source somewhere in this dungeon. As Damien vigilantly walked through this new floor, he finally met his first prey. In front of him was a gray wolf that was slightly shorter than the average human, and judging from the aura it gave off, it was probably around level 8 or 9. Damien and the wolf eyed each other vigilantly before the wolf made the first move and pounced. Damien jumped to his right and drew his short swords. He then teleported to the left side of the wolf and slashed down. The wolf howled in pain as a gash was created in its side and attempted to bite Damien. However, he had already teleported to the adjacent side of the wolf, repeating his previous motion. The wolf, in its confusion, turned completely towards Damien, who vanished from the spot and continued his tactics. 3 stabs later, the wolf collapsed to the floor. You killed LVL9 Grey Wolf. Obtained 50 EXP. Ha, ha. Since the wolf didn't possess a great deal of intelligence, it was relatively easy to deal with, but Damien was still gasping for air. After all, he was never in frontal confrontations before this. Still, he couldn't help but smile. Even though his fight was for survival, he found himself having fun. Fighting, killing, growing stronger. Ever since the possibilities opened up with the introduction of mana, this was all he ever wanted to do. As he looked forward to the seemingly limitless future, he reaffirmed his determination. I will survive. Chapter 7. Survive. Another day passed successfully as Damien continued hunting gray wolves. By this point, he had killed 6 more wolves, and had successfully reached level 9. Damn, it took 6 years for me to reach level 5, but now I've added another 4 levels to that within 3 days. I know the circumstances aren't even close to being in my favor, but maybe this is the kind of environment I needed for my growth. Status. Damien Void. Human male. Age 17, level 9. Classless. Experience value. 251st. 0 titles. Bearer of the Void Physique. Affinities. Space Physique. Void Physique Magic Power. 100 STR. 5 AGI. 8 Def. 3 INT. 6 Dex. 8 Skills. Short Distance Teleportation level 3. Minor Telekinesis level 2. Minor Regeneration level 5. After constantly using his teleportation skill in battle, his mastery began to grow, increasing his distance limit to 25 meters. Furthermore, he passed time by playing with his telekinesis to pull his blades towards himself and managed to increase its level once. Naturally, with all the healing he's had to do with his constant scratches and gashes from battles, his regeneration had the most improvement. Sadly, my physical stats are still stagnant, even though my mana capacity has increased 5-fold. I still haven't been able to test my theory about my void body, but I have a feeling that the best place to test it is when I eat and am forced to mutate. Damien decided to stop hunting for a bit and train his abilities. Although he hadn't failed in a hunt yet, it was only due to his teleportation and the low intelligence of the beasts he fought. He knew that as he went further down into the dungeon, his current advantages would fade. Sitting down in a meditative pose, Damien closed his eyes, trying to feel the space around him. Even before he awakened, he always felt an intrinsic connection to space, as if his awareness was always better than it should be. This feeling only became more prominent after he came in contact with mana. He did not doubt that if it wasn't for his void body holding him back from physical improvement, he would have had enough talent to rival the likes of Elena and Jin. As he focused on this intrinsic connection, Damien felt like he was in the middle of an endless ocean. Layers upon layers and waves upon waves crashed down on him from every direction, seemingly upholding the laws of space in the area. As he dove deeper into this phenomenon, he felt as if he could connect any 2 of these layers, and simply walk to the point in space where they begin and end. I see. So this is the underlying principle behind my teleportation ability. I'm subconsciously connecting 2 points in space and transporting myself through the spatial layers. If it's like that, then I wonder if... Damien connected himself to a faint layer of space he felt past the end of his perception, and willed himself forward. Cough, cough. Suddenly, he appeared 30 meters away from his original position. However, he was now kneeling on the floor and coughing up blood. Still, his eyes were as bright as ever. So that's how it is. Usually I just see a blur before I'm at the point where I want it to be, but I felt it clearly this time. If my body isn't strong enough, the spatial turbulence caused by the connection of two non-adjacent points in space will rip me to shreds. As my understanding of my spatial affinity grows, I can lower the amount of turbulence, increasing the distance I can travel. Similarly, as long as my body grows strong enough, the distance limit will not matter anymore. It looks like I have to test my theory on the void body sooner than I originally planned. Only then can I start growing. Since he wouldn't make progress in the spatial element for a while, he decided to train his swordsmanship. Damien took a stance and swung his swords repeatedly, trying to lower the amount of wasted motion as much as possible. Hours passed like this until the day came to an end, and Damien finally finished training. By the end, he had awakened the skill sword mastery. Although it was only level 1, it still signified that he had stepped on the right path. Damien decided that it was best to rest for a while before he started fighting without abusing his teleportation. Only like this would he be able to consistently improve. Earth POV in a hospital somewhere in Los Angeles. A young woman could be seen sitting patiently beside a hospital bed. She was 17 years old, with dark blue hair and matching eyes that had lost some of their light. Combined with her trained body, she was no doubt someone who could be considered a top beauty. On the bed was a middle-aged woman with black hair. Her eyes were closed as she remained in a coma for the last 6 years. "Auntie, I'm sorry," Elena said with tears in her eyes. "I told him I would protect him, but in the end, he was the one who saved me. That bastard who screwed him over isn't even trying to pretend like he didn't do it." Thinking about that hateful djinn, Elena's eyes grew red with fury. It had been 4 days since Damien had been trapped in the dungeon, and Jin had been flaunting himself like he didn't do anything wrong. To make matters worse, he was now openly attempting to pursue Elena and make her his woman. "Auntie, no matter what, I refuse to believe that he's dead. Damien would never leave you behind. That bastard has to come back. After all, I never told him how I... Never mind." Elena sighed. No matter what people said, no matter what the odds of survival are, Elena adamantly insisted that Damien was alive. When he disappeared through the gate, Elena had raged and punched Jin so hard he flew 10 meters before he managed to stop himself. She would have done much worse if she wasn't stopped by her guild. After that incident, she took some time off and began visiting the hospital almost daily. She had also taken over Damien's mother's hospital bills in his stead. "I promise you that I'll get stronger. So strong that when he comes back, he won't even recognize me. Next time I see him, I'll properly tell him everything. At that time, Auntie, I hope I can have your support as well." Checking the time, Elena got up. "Goodbye for today, Auntie. I'll probably come back pretty soon so you don't have to worry about not having company." Elena left the hospital room and sighed. She wiped the tears that were forming in her eyes as she resolved herself. Never again will I be forced into a position where he has to protect me. When he comes back, he'll definitely be strong, and at that time, I must be able to stand before him confidently. Just like Damien did a few days prior, Elena resolved herself to become stronger than anyone. Chapter 8. Survive. In an unknown dungeon somewhere in the universe, one could see the scene of a slightly skinny young man with black hair and amethyst eyes fighting against 3 human-sized gray wolves. The wolves eyed the human warily, after all. In the past day he had gone around and continuously killed members of their pack. Even with their limited intelligence, they knew he was someone dangerous. The young man Damien was also vigilant about the wolves. To improve his sword mastery, he had become active in his hunt, and found many gray wolves that he subsequently killed. However, since he was only 1 step away from a class change, he needed a much greater amount of EXP than ever before. The 3 wolves circled him, but Damien didn't give them time to prepare. He immediately launched himself towards the first wolf, and smashed down with one of his blades, while simultaneously throwing his second blade at the wolf behind him. As the wolves tried to dodge, Damien used his telekinesis to hold the first one in place, while manipulating the direction of his other blade to pierce the second wolf's flesh. Suddenly, he vanished, narrowly avoiding the claws of the third wolf, and appearing on its back, slicing a deep gash along its spine. With the 3 R&D wolf paralyzed, Damien vanished once more, reappearing holding the handle of his second blade and pulling it downwards with all his might, cutting through the flesh on the wolf's chest. He continued to dance around the wolves, most of the time choosing to dodge with his body, but teleporting when he sees things get dangerous. After 5 long minutes, the first 2 wolves had fallen. You killed 2 level 9 gray wolves, gained 100 EXP. Walking over to the third wolf who had been paralyzed at the beginning, Damien could see the hateful look in its eyes. However, he felt no remorse. It was kill or be killed in the dungeon, and he would not choose the latter option. He lifted his short sword and swiftly beheaded the wolf. You killed a level 9 gray wolf, gained 50 XP. Gathering his breath and wiping the blood off his blades, Damien once again realized he was smiling. Recently, He had begun musing that he might be a battle maniac, as he felt an undeniable thrill in this kill or be killed environment. If it wasn't for his goals and his priorities back on Earth, perhaps he'd stay here longer than he needed to just for the thrill. Damien walked back to his little cave abode while silently admiring the dungeon scenery. The area he was at now had much more flora than anything he had previously seen. Countless plants of various fantastical colors bloomed everywhere, however. He had almost found out the hard way that they're poisonous. Luckily, he decided to feed one to a dying wolf first and ended up killing it. Reaching his home base, Damien sat down to rest. It seems like these wolf lackeys won't be enough to get me up to first class. Each of them is only giving 50 XP now, while the first one only gave around 200 XP. If I kill any more, I won't even gain anything. My next big fight will be against their leader, who's most likely a first class. Judging by how easy it's become to kill level 9 beasts, a first class shouldn't be too hard. Even if it's a tough fight, it's still doable. Sadly, as someone who had given up on the thought of getting stronger, Damien possessed little knowledge of the difference between classes. In due time, he would come to regret his hubris. Damien rested for 4 hours before standing back up. It was his 5th day in the dungeon, and he had the inexplicable feeling that something major would happen today. Damien stared at the cave ceiling, his eyes seemingly attempting to pierce through reality to gaze upon a certain hospital room on Earth. "Mom, I know you can't hear me, but I want you to know that your son is okay. Though this environment is harsh, it seems to be exactly what I need to grow. Don't worry about a thing. By the time I come back to Earth and back to you, I'll be someone you can be proud of. I'll heal your sickness like it's nothing and let you live a lavish life, and maybe we can even find Dad and beat him up a bit for leaving." Damien didn't do this often, but after the reality set in that he might be at the opposite end of the universe from Earth, the pain of being alone came to the forefront. He missed idly talking to his mom, even if she couldn't hear him. He missed his happy days with Elena, where they acted like nothing else in the world mattered. He even missed his shitty one-room apartment, where he at least had a bed to sleep in. Although he had yet to face death, he knew it would happen at some point. He knew his easy ride so far was only because he hasn't met a single beast who evolved past level 10 yet. He sometimes wondered how he could keep such a positive outlook in this kind of situation. But he realized that the humorous attitude he kept was only a coping mechanism. Because some part of him deep down still wanted to think that everything was just a nightmare, and that he was still on Earth living peacefully. Thinking back to his life for the past 5 days without said coping mechanism, he shivered. He hadn't eaten once, and he spent day after day killing, running, and training. Was it mana that gave him the nutrients he needed? Was it just a constant adrenaline rush due to the situation? Or was it a combination of both? Damien didn't know, but he knew he'd run out of steam soon. He let himself rest for a total of around 15 hours through the entire experience, and that's only if his sense of time is still accurate. He didn't want to imagine the kind of personality he'd have once he completely accepted his circumstances. Maybe he'd lose all his humanity and turn into a beast himself. However, he didn't let the thought stir for too long. No matter what he turned into, he didn't have a choice in the matter. He needed to grow stronger regardless of anything, and if he's forced to throw away his humanity to achieve this, he'd do it in an instant. As long as his core principles didn't change, he didn't care what became of him. Calming his mind, he held his hands out, as his short swords came flying towards him. Last time I felt this kind of premonition, I was thrown into a dungeon and left to die in another world. No matter what happens this time, I must remember. I must survive. No matter what, I must survive. Even after 5 days, he still remembered the will he forged after his panic attack in the beginning. Survive. Whether he was joking around, killing, training, or sleeping, this word constantly replayed on loop in his head. Well, he chuckled to himself, I wonder what kind of fun my dog shit luck will bring me today. The hunt resumed once again. Only this time, unbeknownst to him, Damien would be the prey. Chapter 9. Mutate. 2 hours had passed since Damien decided to hunt once more, but his ominous feeling never lessened. Coupled with the fact that he felt like he was being watched, his vigilance was at an all-time high. Damien walked through an unexplored area of the second floor and watched his environment carefully. Throughout his entire 2 hours of walking, he hadn't run into a single beast. Although the gray wolves were the most prominent beasts on this floor, he had run into many smaller and weaker beasts during his travels. However, even they were nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, he heard a branch snap. Grar! From behind him, he heard the growl of a beast. However, he didn't make any sudden movements. A beast that could approach me without alerting my senses. No matter how strong this beast is, it's definitely on a completely different level than the wolves I've been fighting. Damien slowly turned around. When he did, he saw a wolf incomparable to anything else he'd seen on this floor. It was around 3 meters tall, and its gray fur contained patches of black here and there. With its every movement, black lightning coursed through its figure and charred the ground around it. Its aura was so suffocating that Damien was almost completely rooted on the spot. The wolf stared at Damien with a level of rage and intelligence that none of the other wolves possessed. When it had returned from its hunt earlier, it had found that many of the younger wolves in its pack were being slain one after the other. Its kin was one of them. In its rage, it tracked him down, and confronted him itself. Damien didn't know what level this beast was at, but he knew he couldn't face it with his current strength. Is this the difference between classes? He thought to himself as he prepared to run. Damien knew he'd be a fool to turn his back on this beast right now, so his only options were to go left or right. Looking at the beast vigilantly as if he was preparing for battle, Damien lowered his body. Then he turned right and ran as fast as he could. The wolf, however, didn't move, seemingly wanting to toy with its prey. After Damien made a good amount of distance, the wolf let out a howl and shot forward. Within only a matter of seconds, it caught up with Damien, slashing its claws forward at a speed he couldn't follow. Before Damien knew what had happened, he lost feeling in his left leg and tripped. The wolf had precisely severed his Achilles tendon. Biting his lip to muffle a groan of pain, Damien began teleporting away. However, since he wasn't in a correct state of mind and was moving linearly, he couldn't escape. Every time Damien made distance, the wolf caught up immediately, inflicting more flesh wounds on Damien while he continued fleeing. But as he teleported forward one more, he realized the wolf had stopped its pursuit. When he raised his head, all he saw was a vast expanse of darkness. Damien felt despair. Behind him was a monster he couldn't even begin to imagine defeating, and in front of him was a vast abyss whose depth was unknown. He looked to his left and right, and realized that the area around him had narrowed, leaving him without an escape path. The wolf stared at Damien, and noticing the despair that was forming in his eyes, it felt elated. This was the scene it was hoping for. It wanted the killer of its kin to feel the sensation of death slowly encroaching him. He wanted Damien to feel fear he'd never felt before. Damien was desperate. He knew he would die here if he couldn't kill this wolf, but his options were limited. Looking at the deep abyss in front of him, Damien had a crazy idea. If it comes down to it, I can always do that. Since Damien knew he couldn't run anymore, he prepared himself for his body to break down during this fight, however. He wasn't too worried. Once he achieves his first class, his injuries will be healed, and his stamina will be replenished, although only on the surface level. He wouldn't be able to regrow an arm, or anything that major. Damien took out his short swords and vanished from the spot, appearing at the wolf's back legs. He stabbed both of his swords towards the same point, and hoped it would be enough to damage the wolf. However, his hopes were crushed. Even with all his strength, he was only able to make a small cut into the wolf. Damien vanished again, appearing on the other side of the wolf, as he resolved himself to cut until the wolf bled out. Sadly, the wolf wouldn't let him do as he pleased. Due to the difference in combat experience, it only took a minute or so for the wolf to figure out his patterns, leading to claws or a gaping maw greeting Damien every time he teleported. Although it was clear that the wolf had a lightning affinity, it didn't take Damien seriously enough to use it. Like this, the fight continued for several minutes. While the wolf still only had a few gashes, there were plenty of cuts on its body that were leaking blood. But Damien was in a much worse position. His whole body had been covered in cuts, with a deep gash running along his back. He was bleeding profusely, and it looked like he had no chance to win. When the strain of constant teleportation combined with the wounds he received from the wolf, his internal organs were only a couple hits away from turning into mush. At this point, Damien wasn't even thinking properly. All his fear and despair were locked away as his focus stayed solely on keeping his life. His whole being was focused on the word that had become his motto ever since he was stranded. Survive. His gaze focused on a deeper wound he had made on the beast's neck, and he saw an opportunity to win. However, before he could move, he felt his consciousness grow thin. An intense wave of fatigue almost overwhelmed his senses. With his body in such a terrible condition, the fatigue he'd accumulated finally crashed down on him. He felt his weakness clearly, and he sensed death approaching. No. He couldn't accept it. He hadn't even reached the truly grueling floors of the dungeon, yet he was already going to die. After all that resolve he built up, after all those inner monologues he used to calm himself, he would end up dying here. He refused to accept it. He stared at the beast in front of him with a maniacal glint in his eyes. Good. Something had snapped within his mind. He charged once again, completely ignoring the pain that was forcing his consciousness down, as the wolf stared at him with what seemed like contempt in its eyes as it opened its mouth. Damien stabbed into its neck. It bit down ferociously, tearing off his arm. However, Damien continued to ignore the pain. His body was in a state of shock, but he moved again with teleportation. Before Nub, he was on. The blood could even flow from his now armless, the wolf's back, stabbing and slashing continuously with the arm he still had. Awoo! The wolf howled in pain, feeling the sharp blade tearing through its flesh. Blood spurted out of the beast's wounds. Although he sacrificed his left arm, he finally made a substantial wound on the wolf. But But Damien wasn't in the state of mind to celebrate this achievement. Survive. As he stood with blood, both his own and his opponent's, covering his body, he only had one thought in his head. I need to survive. He strengthened his grip on his weapon, and even while coughing up more blood that was now mixed with bits and pieces of his organs, he kept stabbing and slashing. Survive. 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 As the single word repeated in an endless loop, he tore into the wolf, which was already starting to become sluggish from blood loss. He stabbed down once again. However, his weapon broke on contact. Survive. 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 Even as he lost all his bearings from blood loss, even as death began to embrace him, he could only hear one word. He stuck his hand into the wound on the beast's neck and ripped it open, sinking his teeth into its raw flesh. Survive. 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 He clawed, bit, and ate. And with the last bit of reasoning he maintained, he used the broken weapon to stab into the gaping hole in the wolf's neck. The wolf began to fall. Its eyes were filled with unwillingness, thinking that if it just used all its power from the beginning, it wouldn't have ended up in this state. But there was no medicine for regret. However, it wouldn't go down easy. Even if it died here, it would take the human that killed its kin with it. Staring at the abyss that was only a slight distance away, the wolf jumped. Chapter 10. Mutate. After using the last of its strength to jump, the wolf died. However, Damien, who was still on its back, didn't realize this or even the fact that he was currently falling into an abyss. Just as he was about to pass out after killing the wolf, his consciousness was forced awake by a mind-numbing pain. With this pain came clarity, and while being glad he survived, he also realized that he had eaten huge chunks of the wolf's flesh and meat while he was in his deranged state. Now Damien was feeling the consequences of his actions. He had begun his mutation. Since he had killed the wolf, he knew he had leveled up multiple times, but he didn't know exactly how much since he couldn't focus on the holographic windows that popped up in front of him. Inside Damien's body, mana raged as his organs healed. However, they were immediately crushed into paste right after. This process continued as the essence that he was granted from the rising of his league battled the lightning attribute mana of the wolf that was raging inside of him, frying his organs. Damien felt like he was strapped to an electric chair, only he couldn't die, while simultaneously being struck by hundreds of hammers and needles on every inch of his body. The electric currents raged, leaving him paralyzed so he couldn't even scream out in pain. It wasn't just his organs that were feeling this process though, as his skin, his bones, and even his blood also started being refined. Throughout all of this, Damien stayed conscious. He could only focus on the pain he felt, and the sensation of his body essentially becoming a flesh bag, and then being healed back to normal over and over again. Combined with the endless darkness he saw on every side, Damien really thought he might have gone to hell. His body was still straddled to the wolf's carcass, but as time went on, pieces of said carcass evaporated into essence and entered Damien's body. Sensing the current condition of its owner, his void body had activated, devouring every form of energy in the near vicinity. Damien, however, was unaware of this, attributing the influxes of energy as waves of beast mana fighting against the natural mana he gained through his level-ups. Seconds turned into minutes which felt like hours to Damien, and at some point he had stopped falling. His body, which should have been smashed to meat paste upon falling such a distance, actually created a small crater when it reached the floor. Damien still didn't move though, since his mutation was still ongoing. His eyes, which were always a deep amethyst color, were now mixed with red, and his hair gained some silver highlights and lengthened until it was shoulder length. His canines sharpened as well, while his body, which had remained skinny to this day, began growing some muscle. The biggest change happened in his legs. While on the outside, his legs just gained some muscle and stayed symmetrical with the rest of his body, their internal structure was completely changed. Every muscle, bone, tendon, and ligament was optimally arranged to waste no motion and to prioritize speed. Tufts of fur began growing out of various parts of his body, but were immediately turned into energy by his void body and consumed. A pair of wolf ears started sprouting on the top of his head too, however they met the same fate as the fur. It seemed that Damien's theory about his void body was partially correct. When such a large influx of mana and energy entered his body, it immediately destroyed him from the inside. If his void body hadn't stolen that energy, he would have died immediately. Due to this, he was able to strengthen, while anything excess that was created was turned into energy for his physique. Through his reckless action, he was able to unlock a sub-ability of his physique, though Damien didn't know that. He had expected his physique to consume all of the beast mana, making him go through minimal mutation. However, his physique allowed him to optimize his mutation for combat, while only stealing the excess that was left afterward. What felt like many days later, Damien finally felt the pain recede to a tolerable level. Though he still felt phantom pains where his left arm should have been, even that wound had been seared closed by the rampaging lighting attribute. Damien caught his breath. The torture he was forced to endure almost made him insane. But now that the pain didn't cloud his mind, he could feel what he had gained. His eyesight had sharpened immensely along with his hearing, and his canines seemed sharp enough to cut his flesh like butter, while his body was on a completely different level. Back on Earth, no matter what he tried, whether it be dieting, going to the gym, or even completing the One-Punch Man training routine every day for a week, he was never able to change his build. Now, however, he had finally formed some muscle. Although it wasn't defined yet, he could see that the framework of a proper six-pack had formed. And all it took was eating one wolf and enduring just a tad bit of brutal torture. Damien joked to himself. He could also feel a new sort of danger sense had formed within him. Along with a certain desire, however, he suppressed it while remembering that he had just leveled up. He then checked the notifications he got while he was mutating. You killed level 15 Thunderwolf. Gained 5,000 EXP. Leveled up. Leveled up. Leveled up. You have successfully raised your league for the first time. Through the growth of your legend, a class can be obtained. Choose a class. 1. Swordsman. 2. Spatial Mage. 3. Cleric. 4. Monster Hunter. 5. Explorer. Congratulations. You have successfully mutated. You are the first individual from the world, Earth, to accomplish a perfect mutation. Due to this immense achievement, you have been granted the title, Evolver. Your legend has been advanced. Damien was shocked as he read the messages. Words like League and Legend were completely foreign to him, but he mused that it must be the basis on which the system categorizes strength. Checking the class list, Damien felt he didn't even need to contemplate his choices. His biggest strength was his teleportation, and becoming a spatial mage seemed to be a way to expand upon similar powers. Thinking up to this point, Damien didn't hesitate and chose his first class. You have become a spatial mage. During the creation of the universe, the first concepts to exist were creation and destruction, followed by space and time, then life and death. Space is an essential concept in upholding the fabric of reality. You have embarked on a path to discover its secrets. Although he didn't feel any major changes, Damien felt his horizons broaden. The concepts he could never quite grasp, and new ideas on how to use his spatial affinity flooded his mind. Choosing his class had somewhat enlightened him, but how he chose to go about using that information was up to him. Unable to hold back his anticipation any longer, Damien decided to check his status. Status, Damien Void. Half human, half beast. Male, age 17. Level 14. Spatial Mage. Experience value, 50 over 4,500. Title, S. Bearer of the Void Physique, Evolver. Affinities, Space, Lightning. Physique, Void Physique. Magic Power, 740. STR, 60. AGI, 90. Def, 60. INT, 50. Dex 90. Skills, Teleportation level 1, Minor Telekinesis level 5, Regeneration level 2, Sword. Mastery level 3, Danger Sense level 1. Damien was ecstatic. Seeing his stats, which had increased more than tenfold, he realized the benefits of evolution. Thinking about the title he gained, he checked its effects, something he's unable to do for his other two titles. Evolver, a title granted to those who have exceeded their racial limits without suffering consequences. By completing a perfect mutation, you have acquired the ability to evolve like beasts while simultaneously gaining classes like humans. Damien smiled, thinking that the title was self-explanatory. He had also gained a new affinity for lightning, though he guessed that this was just due to luck. His teleportation skill was no longer short distance, as he could clearly feel a connection to the spatial layers in a 5-kilometer radius. He also felt like he could abuse his teleportation without strain for extended periods of time. Next, he tried to test his regeneration. He went to cut his arm, only to realize that his arm was no longer there. His face turned grim. No matter. Let this arm be a reminder of my near-death experience today. I was so confident in killing a first class, only for it to toy with me and almost take my life. I'll find some way to heal my arm later, but for now, I need this lesson. Although he still attempted to joke around, his mind had now completely accepted the situation. After all, he almost died. If he was still feeling even the slightest bit of denial, he might lose his life for real in the future. As Damien's thoughts turned darker, that certain desire rose again. However, this time, he was unable to suppress it. It was a bestial desire that came from the core of his being. A desire that rose to prominence after losing a part of his humanity. A desire felt by all beasts who grow stronger under the system. It was the desire to kill, to eat, and to evolve. Chapter 11. Kill, Blood. The cracked stone floors of the endless cavern were being dyed red, and a putrid stench began to suffuse the environment. Most of the beasts on this floor were fleeing in every direction, hoping to find salvation from the predator that stalked them all. Of course, most of them decided to fight back at first after all. A beast's natural instinct was to kill, eat, and evolve. However, the beast they were up against was too feral. Every beast that attempted to fight was either torn up, exploded and fried by lightning, or had its body parts mangled mysteriously. This scene had continued for 3 floors already, but the predator was far from being satiated. Whenever it saw any life, it moved to kill. Whenever it felt fatigue, it tore open beasts and ate them raw. Whenever it felt dehydrated, it would drink their blood for sustenance. It didn't seem to care about anything at all, even its own health, as it moved with the singular purpose to bring death. Besides, even if a beast managed to injure it, the beast would rapidly heal. Their strength ranging between levels 10 to 20 had no ability to resist. The various beasts who originally inhabited the floor had enough intelligence to know they couldn't survive alone, so they teamed up and attacked. A group of 30 beasts all together surrounded a single one, however. It was the group of 30 that truly felt fear. The beast they were facing had a mane of black hair with streaks of silver, eyes that were a mix between deep amethyst and blood red, swirling in a yin-yang pattern, and a bipedal body that was growing more and more muscle as time passed. This beast was naturally Damien. After Damien's thought process turned dark in the abyss, he lost control over his emotions, inadvertently letting his beast side take over. Without any control over his newly gained bestial instinct, he went berserk and began killing everything he laid eyes on. An indiscernible amount of time had passed since then, and Damien had descended 3 more floors. If an observer was present to witness the aftermath left on those 3 floors, all they would see is an endless sea of blood and mangled corpses. Any beast that escaped his grasp either tunneled into the ground farther than his reach extended or fled to the lower floors. However, most of the latter group still ended up dying by his hand. Even though he wasn't rational in the slightest, he still had all his power. He would teleport freely to cut off any escape routes and channel lightning as if he had been wielding it all his life. He killed, he ate, and he evolved until the floor he was on had no more use to him. Then he descended to continue. Even after all this time, he showed no signs of regaining his rationality. The group of beasts that had surrounded him charged ferociously, as they knew their lives were already forfeit. Their only hope was to take him down with them. But Damien, especially without his rational mind, was a being who was hell-bent on survival by any means. After his near-death experience, this became rooted firmly as the core of his mentality. Those within the tide of beasts that possessed elemental affinities chose this moment to attack. A barrage of fireballs, ice and earth spikes, and even wind blades converged upon his location. However, this was all for naught. Damien had already vanished from his original position, appearing at the edge of the tide. His stance was prone as his nails elongated and became more claw-like. He lunged at a beast and directly tore out its heart, throwing it to the side. He then continued his slaughter. Black lightning danced around his body, increasing his speed 3-fold as he pounced from beast to beast. His movements were completely primal, but looked eerily beautiful as he moved efficiently within a whirlwind of blood. Everywhere he passed, dismembered limbs and random organs of beasts flew. The tide of originally 30 beasts was already cut down by half in just a matter of minutes. The beasts gave up on elemental attacks after seeing Damien avoid them easily, and used their body strength to try and wear him down. Various claws, hooves, and talons continuously fell on his body, accumulating countless gashes. However, it didn't matter. With only beasts of similar levels around him, Damien was nigh invincible. His regeneration was passively healing every injury he received, leaving him without even a single scar. Another few minutes later, Damien had mutilated every beast in his vicinity, even the ones that weren't a part of the beast hide that desperately attacked him. He turned to glance at the dismembered flesh and chunks of organs that laid waste to the originally dry ground and snorted, continuing to the next floor. Continuous evolution through eating beasts, Damien had formed a sort of sixth sense that allowed him to know whether a beast's meat and blood would benefit him. This was why, even in his berserk state, Damien never stayed on one floor for too long. The Damien that almost died on the second floor couldn't even begin to compare with the Damien that existed in the present. With him gaining a surefire method to strengthen his body, and a first class related to his spatial affinity, his full potential was finally unleashed. It was previously mentioned that without the limitations of his body, Damien theorized that he'd have talent that rivals Elena and Jin's. However, he was sorely mistaken. His talent vastly eclipsed both of them, and his spatial affinity was one of the rarest elements. Now that he could follow 2 different power systems to gain strength, through evolution and class advancement, his growth rate would hail him a supreme genius. However, Damien was in no mind to care. He continued to kill, eat, and evolve. Every once in a while he would gain levels as well, as he continued to descend the dungeon. Damien's main consciousness was currently trapped in a world filled with blood. When his bestial instinct took over, he suddenly appeared here with no idea what was going on. When he tried to move, he had realized that his body was semi-ethereal and seemed to be fading out of existence. He wasn't the only one in this world, however, as he soon discovered an enormous wolf that he remembered killing only a couple of minutes prior. The wolf had charged at him as another harrowing battle between the two began, But just as Damien managed to kill the wolf, which was much weaker than its living counterpart, more and more beasts began appearing around him. Thus, Damien was trapped in a seemingly never-ending battle. Each time he killed a beast, another one appeared without end. He was only given an hour or two of reprieve every so often when his body was descending to a lower floor. With the continuation of this cycle, he was starting to lose his sanity. Unbeknownst to Damien, who had no room to think about anything other than surviving this endless beast tide, this world was something akin to a sea of consciousness. Each time he devoured a beast and further evolved himself, his bestial instinct would grow. Each beast that appeared was just a manifestation of this desire. Damien's fight in the blood world wasn't one for survival, but rather a fight for sanity. If he ended up dying to these beasts, he would forever live solely on his bestial instinct. His thoughts and emotions as a human would cease to exist. Thus, Damien continued fighting two never-ending battles simultaneously. One with the goal of evolution and strength, and the other with the goal of maintaining his will. Chapter 12, Kill. Time passed in this manner as Damien conquered two more floors. Paying no mind to the blood-stricken walls around him, he continued forward to the next floor. This floor, however, was different from the rest. Rather than the endless cavern he had seen up until this point, this floor was roughly the size of a city. Its walls were smooth and lit with what seemed to be primitive torches made by lighting bundles of wood on fire. In front of him wasn't dreary stone with the occasional flora, but a roughly built village. There were indents on the cave floor that seemed to indicate roads and small shacks and huts made of mud and rock placed along the road randomly. Damien's beastly instinct became vigilant. Although he would usually wantonly attack anything in sight, this abrupt change in environment had invoked the natural cautiousness he had inherited from the very first wolf he devoured. As he scanned the place with his spatial awareness, he spotted many small green creatures, the tallest ones being just above 1 meter in height. At the same time, they spotted him. When they did, they suddenly began screeching to each other, seemingly communicating. Then, they all grabbed their weapons and congregated around the main stone hut in the middle of the village. Thudding footsteps rang out and echoed through the city as the door to the hut opened. What stepped out was another green creature, however. This one was around 1.7 meters tall and had a round body. Its body was covered in armor made of beast bones, and on its shoulder stood a large battle axe. Cree! It screeched as it looked at Damien while radiating an air of superiority. Meanwhile, Damien's blood boiled. On the past 2 floors, he hadn't found more than 2 or 3 beasts that could help him evolve, and in his rage, he slaughtered the rest of the floor. However, he could see that the humanoid creature in front of him would help him immensely. Sparing no time for thought, Damien charged. With his every movement, space distorted and mutilated the random goblins that were in his path, while Damien's sole focus was on their king. With a bestial roar, Damien stuck his claws forward, attempting to pierce the heart. However, he was immediately repelled. Confused, Damien tried once more, only to face the same problem. Keke! The Goblin King let out a peal of strange laughter after seeing his confusion. Its skin had a natural property of absorbing and reflecting physical damage, and this is what had allowed him to reign over this floor to this day. One of the king's favorite things was watching its enemies try to breach his defenses, only to achieve nothing. So the king stayed its hand without attacking, confident that it would get to see another amusing sight today. Unfortunately, its opponent was Damien. Seeing that physical attacks were useless, Damien charged lightning in his palms before shooting it forward, trying parts of the goblin's skin. Cree. The Goblin King was enraged. Even if the attack didn't hurt it, it was insulted that the enemy had injured its skin. Raising its great axe, it charged. The goblin swung its axe at Damien with immense strength as Damien quickly teleported out of its way. Appearing behind the goblin, he grabbed its head and ran electricity through its skull. Though the attack didn't do damage, it managed to paralyze the goblin for a second. Using the opening he created, Damien grabbed the goblin's arm and distorted space, using the pressure to turn the arm into a sack of paste. Cree! The goblin roared in pain. It had never felt this much pain, as the impact was usually negated when it hit its skin, and it lost the ability to think rationally. It turned to Damien and wildly began swinging its great axe, which Damien dodged with ease. The power has lessened greatly due to the goblin's state of mind, so he felt no danger from the swings. Ducking under the goblin's swing, Damien used another spatial distortion to break the goblin's leg, earning another screech of pain. Although the Goblin King could negate physical damage under a certain level, he could never compete if the environment was the one that deemed him to die. Space was an esoteric and extremely powerful concept, which was why spatial users were generally always feared. Once the goblin lost its balance, Damien immediately grabbed its head and distorted it, leaving it twisted at a 180 degrees angle. With its neck snapped, the Goblin King immediately died. When the surrounding goblins witnessed this, their eyes turned red with rage. Screeching at the top of their lungs, they charged at Damien. However, they never stood a chance. Damien simply distorted the space around him, and all those goblins died fruitlessly. His whole focus was on the corpse of the Goblin King. With greed in his eyes, he began to devour. After eating the Goblin King, Damien's body once again went through an intensive mutation like the first one. Although it wasn't nearly as bad, the pain was still immense. Up until this point, devouring beasts had only served to strengthen his body, not change its structure, but it seemed that unique traits that would help him improve would always result in these kinds of mutation. While Damien fell to the floor, his muscles, tendons, and tissue were all being pulled and compressed continuously. When they were finished, they had also gained the property of absorption and reflection that the Goblin King possessed. And just like it did with the wolf, his void physique activated and turned the remains of the Goblin King into essence to aid his mutation. As his body evolved, Damien once again fought the Goblin King in the blood world. This Goblin King, being only a manifestation of his instinct, did not possess its unique trait. With its death, Damien finally fell to the floor. I have no idea how much time has passed since I entered this mysterious space, but I can still feel a connection with my body. During the short moments of respite he had, Damien had begun thinking of his circumstances and had formulated a general idea of what happened. I went berserk. I don't know what exactly is going on, but I'm sure that all the beasts I had to kill recently were already killed once by me. But it looks like the cycle has finally ended. Whatever the immense pain I can faintly feel from the connection to my body is, it's my opportunity to regain control. The evolution process, being a complete change in the structure of his body, would naturally take time to complete. And during this time, Damien meditated to regain control. When he did, he felt the desire to kill that had formulated this blood world. I see. So this whole time I was fighting my bestial instinct. Damien was drenched in a cold sweat. If I had died here, my ego would have been erased. How scary. But that doesn't matter anymore since I've already won. Damien's eyes snapped open. I've already overpowered this instinct. Now all that's left is to force it to submit to my rational mind. As Damien thought this, he released his entire aura and distorted the space around him. This is my mind, my body. I, Damien Void, will never become something akin to a mere beast. Break from me. Damien roared with all his breath as he punched the ground with immense force. Immediately the blood world began to crack. I will be something even the heavens must look up to. How dare I be controlled by the instincts of a beast? As he had this thought, Damien's view turned black, and the immense pain of evolution overwhelmed him. Chapter 13. Devour. Damien felt a rush of memories superimpose on his endless fight against the beast tide. These were naturally the records of his deeds in his berserk state. Although the pain of evolution was still present, it was nothing compared to the pain of integrating two sets of memories that took place at the same time. Damien was now aware of his rampage, but he wasn't too surprised at what had happened, since he had fought the manifestation of the bestial instinct that was controlling him. What he was more surprised about was the fact that he had seemingly just defeated a floor boss. This meant that he was on a floor that was a multiple of 10 though. With the length of his fall unknown, he didn't know which floor it was. Although I'm back in control of my body, I still feel a stronger desire to kill than I did before. Also, even from a glance, it's clear that my body has changed. Damien looked at his nails, which were more apt to be called claws now. He then retracted them with a thought. Retractable claws are pretty cool though. I feel like Wolverine or something. Anyway, I should check the changes in my status after my rampage. Status. Damien Void. Half human, half beast. Male, age 17. Level 26. Spatial Mage. Experience value. 365 over 9,000. Title. S. Bearer of the Void Physique, Evolver. Affinities. Space. Lightning. Physique. Void Physique. Magic Power, 1350. STR, 180. AGI, 150. Def, 130. Def, 200. Int, 180. Regeneration level 6. Sword Mastery. Level 3. Danger Sense level 6. Devour level 1. Damien was satisfied with his improvements. Although it was true that he wasn't in his right state of mind, it seemed like he had improved quite a bit. Most of his improvements came from evolution, as he consumed every beast that would make his body stronger. But for those beasts that wouldn't help him evolve, or the ones he had killed in a blind rage, they were turned into EXP. Like this, he had an extremely strong body compared to his level, and it seemed he could now fight evenly against most beasts within the bounds of first class. He also noticed the new properties of his body. His abs were completely formed now, and his body looked like it was chiseled rather than built through exercise. His height had also grown 1.9 meters. If it weren't for his missing arm, it'd be a perfect body. Structurally, it was different as well. With the Goblin King's unique trait of absorption and reflection, his whole body had become more dexterous. He felt that with enough training, he could twist and dodge at impossible angles, catching his enemies off guard. The second thing Damien paid attention to was his skills. His teleportation's range had grown quite a bit, reaching 7 kilometers, while his telekinesis could now be used with more versatility, such as when he distorted space to kill the goblins. Since he never used a sword, His mastery obviously hadn't improved, but his danger sense had made immense progress, and he felt he could use it to sense any prescience within a 1-kilometer radius. His main focus was on his new skill. He had an inkling of what it did, but he still checked to make sure. Devour. Due to the synergy between the title, Evolver, and the Void Physique, a new skill has been created. This skill substitutes the consumption process when evolving and helps optimize evolution to prioritize the user's needs. Due to the creation of a unique skill, your legend has advanced. Damien was glad he got this skill. Now that he had his rationality back, he was reluctant to continue behaving in such a primal manner. After all, no normal human would enjoy tearing open and eating beasts raw. Furthermore, since the skill optimized the devoured energy to suit his needs, he could quench his hunger and thirst, without needing to physically eat and drink beast blood. The indiscernible amount of time he'd spent in his berserk state had left a slight trauma in his mind. He now held a slight disgust towards the sight of blood that wasn't useful to his evolution. Looking at his surroundings, Damien noticed many goblin bodies littering the floor. Even if they won't help me get stronger, they're a good chance to test this skill. Damien took some time to pile up all the bodies in the middle of the room. Once he was done, he put his hand on the pile and cast his skill. Devour. Fog seeped out of his arm and formed a huge construct that looked like the maw of a terrifying beast. Then the fog went forward and enveloped the entire pile. Damien could foreign mana enter his body and become annexed as his, while a good portion of it strengthened the trait he gained from the Goblin King. But the most intriguing part was that most of the essence went towards providing him sustenance. Damien immediately felt much lighter, as if a mountain had been taken off his back. It seems there was a lot of hidden fatigue built up in my body after what I can only consider as months of endless slaughter. Damien was pleasantly surprised. He had no idea he was carrying so much fatigue, but if the skill could pinpoint that and counter it, it was even more perfect than he thought. Standing up, Damien stretched his body. Didn't set in earlier since I was preoccupied with the changes in my body, but it's good to be back. Damien loved battle. He had accepted the fact that he was a bit weird in this regard, but spending so much time in an endless battle to the point where he couldn't even measure it anymore was too much even for him. Due to this, Damien decided to take a small break in his descent and train. Looking around at the small huts and shacks, Damien smiled. Although it's just a work of goblins, it's nice to see a change of scenery. Perhaps at the lower floors I might see some even more interesting things. When he entered the Goblin King's hut, his smile grew even wider. He immediately disregarded everything else and punched forward, landing on a soft surface. Ha! A bed! Who would have thought I'd be lucky enough to find a bed anywhere near here? Damien rolled around in the small bed made of unknown materials like a child as he slightly relaxed. Even though it was accidental, I still spent a long time power leveling. I guess I should take a break and bring my sword skills up to par and refine my fighting style. Thinking idle thoughts, Damien closed his eyes and drifted to sleep. With his body and mind finally relaxing after many grueling months, he ended up having a nice dream. It was a dream of the future with his mother, his father, and a couple of blurry figures that he didn't know quite yet relaxing and laughing. It was a dream of what he sought to achieve. A dream of his peaceful life after he reached the apex. Damien woke up with a gentle smile on his face, a huge contrast to the intense fire burning in his eyes. With the flames of motivation pumping heavily through his body, he began his training. Chapter 14. Encounter. Ever since regaining control of his body, Damien had felt a slight disconnect between his thoughts and movements. Besides this problem, his sword mastery severely lagged behind the rest of his improvements. He also had never created a real skill for his lightning, only subconsciously using it in his berserk state. Now it was time for him to digest his gains and further expand upon them. Damien exited his hut and stretched his body. If only I could have a training montage or something. I feel like time would pass easier that way. Sadly, this isn't anime, so I have to work for my gains. Even as he sighed about his unfortunate fate as a real person, he took his sword off his back for the first time in what felt like months. I should perfect my sword forms and maybe attempt to create an art since I'll be stuck here for a while. I also don't know if something like sword aura exists since it was never discovered on Earth. Maybe that's something I can gain with enough practice. Since I have a spatial affinity, it's a basic requirement to have a dimensional slash of some form. Thinking idle thoughts, Damien began swinging his sword. He especially had to focus on balance, since he did not possess a left arm. Minutes turned into hours as hours became days, and Damien was still practicing his sword without rest. If one could witness him, he would look like he was dancing. Only his dance was deadly enough to cause fierce winds to howl throughout the area. A few minutes later, Damien paused. Sword aura definitely exists. I can feel something ethereal growing within me as I perfect my sword. Damien could feel a sharp aura growing around his body as he continued to practice, shifting his whole presence to become more sword-like. His sword mastery had just reached level 6 for him to feel the sensation, so he mused that his sword aura would be complete after he reached level 10. Feeling that he wouldn't make any more progress in his sword skills, Damien switched to training his lightning. Although he had plenty of ideas for how to use his spatial affinity, most of them were supportive rather than offensive. He figured that many of his ideas could only be used at second, or maybe even third class. Summoning his lightning, he began to ponder its usage. My black lightning is more focused on power than speed. Although it can increase my speed, I've already figured out the method for that. Simply channeling it internally is enough for now. I can also infuse it into my weapon for added penetration and damage. What he needed now was attacks that used his lightning externally. So Damien began to ponder the various anime, light novels, and mythology he had seen on Earth for ideas. After all, even if they were fictional, the authors and creators tended to put a lot of time into working out the practicality of attacks so their readers wouldn't complain about it being too unrealistic. Damien's eyes lit up as he had a thought. Beam weapons. Everyone loves beam weapons. Let's do that then. Damien put his arm out and began to charge his lightning into his palm. He concentrated on compressing the lightning as much as possible until he felt that it would just explode if he continued. Then, he released it forward. Boom! Damien flew backward 10 meters before he managed to stabilize himself. It turns out, rather than a beam attack, he had just created a bomb. After he released the lightning, it took the shape and size of a baseball and flew forward, impacting the cave wall and exploding. The force of the explosion was great enough to push Damien back, even though he was relatively far from its center. He didn't get what he wanted, but he got something useful. Damn. It seems like I suck at controlling my lightning externally at the moment. I'll need to practice more later, but I don't want to take too much time here and delay. My main priority is to get to the surface, and then find a way to Earth. Because of all intensity of his last many months worth of fighting, he had nearly forgotten his original goal. Survival had become one of the most important things to him. Now that he had taken a breather, he once again remembered his mother that he left on Earth, and the revenge he had yet to complete. Thinking about revenge, his mind began to turn red. Kill. 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 The word repeated in his head over and over again until he was forced to stab himself in the leg. Blood ran down his leg from the wound he just created and his mind slowly regained clarity. Damien smiled wryly. Although I've regained control, the bestial instinct isn't something foreign. After I mutated, it has become a part of me. If I don't control my emotions, there's a good chance I'll go berserk again. Damien sighed, thinking about the future, but he was still resolved to continue. Just like I learned to control my lightning and spatial affinities, just like I learned to control my body and refine my movements, I just need to learn to control my instincts and not run rampant. Once he had completely calmed down, Damien removed his sword from his leg and allowed it to heal. It's time to continue forward. And like that, Damien descended to the next floor. Just like he did when he was berserk, Damien chased down beasts to kill so he could level up, and when he sensed that a beast could help him strengthen his body, he'd devour it. He continued this routine for the next 5 floors, however. Unlike before, he was conscious of his movements and constantly working not only to improve his level and body but his techniques. His sword mastery became level 8, his teleportation gained a level, and his telekinesis could barely even be called that anymore. Swithel grew. It became more and more like spatial control than simple telekinesis, allowing him to bend space to his will and manipulate it more freely. Furthermore, Damien was no longer killing every beast on the floor to be satiated. He would only kill until he couldn't benefit anymore and then leave. Now that he was conscious, he wanted to make sure he wouldn't become more bestial than he already was. He doesn't plan to surround himself with corpses forever, if he wants to properly. After integrate with society and return to Earth with his head held high, he needed to maintain the last bits of his humanity that he had left. Now that Damien was on the lower floors, beasts were becoming much more intelligent as their average level rose. He could no longer rest or lower his guard at any moment. The second he did, he'd be sneak attacked by various beasts, who saw him as a treasure for getting stronger. He also couldn't clear floors as fast as he could during his rampage. Though it was completely up to him when he descended, he always made sure he was the strongest being on his current floor before he did so. He needed to be prepared for any eventuality. And like this, Damien continued his routine. He would kill, he would devour, and he would level up and evolve. He never slept anymore, and removed his fatigue purely through the energy he gained from his devour skill. As he kept going, a gut feeling began to rise. Usually, when he felt this gut feeling, it was ominous, like when he was stranded in the dungeon or when he had his near-death experience. But this time was different. This time, his gut feeling was telling him that an opportunity was waiting for him. Chapter 15, Encounter. Another month or so passed. Currently, Damien had cleared another 4 floors and was headed to what he assumed was the next boss room. However, he doubted he would have any trouble, considering how much preparation he took before descending. As he walked down the slope that led to the next floor, he pondered on the environment he'd been seeing as he went lower. Surprisingly, The most desolate areas of the dungeon are the higher floors. The only way for beasts to survive is to eat each other and evolve. However, the farther I come down, the more vegetation I see in the surroundings. If it's like this, then perhaps on even lower floors, there are areas where monsters have formed a stable ecosystem, rather than the land of death and survival that I've grown accustomed to. On the past 9 floors he'd cleared, he saw growing amounts of various plants and grasses. There was even a single tree on the most recent floor. He mused that sometime within the next 20 floors he might get to see a forest for the first time in what felt like years. Thinking idle thoughts, Damien reached the next floor. Unlike the goblin village he saw on the previous boss floor, this one was cloaked in glaring darkness. Damien walked forward vigilantly, as to not fall victim to any ambushes as he entered the boss floor. He stretched his spatial awareness as far as possible, and what he saw made his face pale. Although it was never mentioned previously, as Damien never felt the need to think about it, he had an extremely irrational fear of spiders. But it wasn't the kind of fear where he would run as far as possible to get away. Rather, it was the type of fear where he would use any means possible to kill any spider he sees, so as to decrease the number of spiders in existence as much as possible. As for what he saw covering the entire boss floor, webs. In every direction he saw webs strewn about to catch any prey that was unlucky enough to wander into their grasp. Luckily, Damien didn't see the spider who strung the webs, or he might have gone berserk even while being fully conscious. Damien became extremely paranoid for no reason. No matter what the boss on this floor was, he had built the capability to slay it with ease. However, there was a reason his fear was considered irrational. Suddenly, Damien slashed his sword to his left, emitting a wave of lightning, but he hit nothing. The spider was surprised to see Damien react to its movements, but it wasn't worried. It had been born with a special set of eyes that allowed it to predict its opponent's movements and see through anything false. Due to this, it had developed a superior intelligence compared to most beasts on its level, and seeing that Damien was much stronger than it was, it decided to use its eyes and intelligence to win this fight. Many minutes passed, but Damien still hadn't caught sight of the spider. He had sensed it attempting to attack 3 or 4 times, but whenever he countered, it was never in the same position. Damien was starting to get irritated. Usually he'd just distort space around him so that the spider would get crushed by pressure, but he wasn't thinking calmly. After many more minutes of the same routine, Damien lost his cool. "Screw it, I'm gonna blow this damn spider all the way past hell and down wherever the place deeper than hell is." Damien gathered and compressed and released lightning continuously, forming lightning bullets that flew through the floor. A series of explosions rang out, causing clouds of dust and debris to be kicked around. And within that dust and debris, Damien spotted the spider. Finally seeing the annoying pest he needed to kill, he immediately teleported over. The spider panicked. It had predicted that it could use its poison to kill Damien after wearing him down, but it could have never predicted his immense hatred for spiders. As it began computing new paths to victory, it felt a sharp pain in its abdomen. Damien was behaving like a primate at this point. He threw down his sword and continuously bashed the spider's body with his fist. Every once in a while, he would teleport into the air and drop a heavy kick onto its head. Specialized in poison and ambush tactics, so its physical ability wasn't that developed, and Damien could have ended the fight with a couple of swings of his lightning-infused sword, but he was much more brutal. Now that he had the spider in his grasp, he wouldn't let it escape. Whenever it tried to run, he would appear in front of it and continue his brutal beating. The spider could only lament at the fact that it had met such a devil and wonder what it did to deserve such a fate. Luckily, it didn't need to endure for much longer, as Damien let one last heavy punch towards its head, crushing its skull and killing it. Ha ha! Another scourge eliminated. Damien smiled, seemingly proud of himself, before looking at the spider corpse in disdain. He really didn't want to devour the spider. He felt that it would be a stain on his record to take on characteristics of a spider, but he knew he had to continue growing stronger. Now that he had eliminated the scourge to humanity, his rational mind was back in control. Put his arm forward and that gaping shadowy maw once again formed, completely. Damien consuming the spider. Damien had mentally prepared himself to feel extreme pain in his body, but he wasn't ready at all. This time, the evolution of his body was minimal. After all, the spider itself didn't have a strong body. Instead, Damien felt a searing pain in his eyes, as if they were being melted by intense heat and repeatedly stung by a horde of wasps at the same time. Considering the intense amounts of pain he had to endure during his time in the dungeon, Damien never expected he'd reach a level he couldn't handle again, but reality proved him wrong. The pain in his eyes at the moment genuinely made him want to scream like a little girl and roll around the floor, but he bit his lip until it bled and endured. Hours later, his evolution ended. Removing his hand that was covering them, he slowly opened his eyes. When he did, he had no choice but to gasp in amazement. The world he was seeing now was completely different than what he could see before. The glaring darkness that felt almost abyssal was no longer a problem, and he could see everything as if it was broad daylight. The significance of this couldn't be underestimated. Ever since he was stranded, Damien could only see clearly due to his eyes adapting to the environment, and his senses sharpening from his first mutation. But the environment he saw was still gloomy and dark. Now, every detail of the cave around him could be seen clearly. Every crack in the yellowish-brown cave walls, every speck of dust that was kicked up by his previous rampage, every small plant organism that stuck to the ceiling and floor, it was all as clear as if he was looking at them through a microscope. These were just the superficial aspects, though. When Damien waved his arm, he could see physical ripples occur in the space surrounding him. The spatial layers he could previously only sense when he meditated or concentrated were clear to see. Even more surprising were the swirls of multicolored light that lingered around the environment. Yellowish light radiated from the cave walls and ceilings, a slight hue of green could be seen in the air, and patches of purple were scattered about the rubble on the floor. These patches of purple are the lightning mana I released earlier when I carpet-bombed this place, Damien realized. Then this must be earth, and this is wind. Haha, this is amazing. Although Damien had received many special things before this, he felt that these eyes were his most useful evolution to date. Suddenly, a holographic window appeared, snapping him out of his reverie. The user has received the trait. All-Seeing Eyes. All-Seeing Eyes resonates with the dormant attribute within the user. Trait. All-Seeing Eyes has completed resonance with the dormant attribute. The trait has gained the ability to evolve, and will be shown in the Skills section of the user's status. Due to being the first human from the world Earth to create an evolving trait, the user's legend has been enhanced. Damien grinned. Although he didn't know what the dormant attribute was, he knew it'd be a good thing once he discovered it. He had also gained a trait he could evolve, unlike the Goblin King's trait, which would only work on those of equal or lower level than him, no matter how strong he got. Damien's grin widened. Even if this eye power was the opportunity he had been sensing recently, he'd be satisfied. But noticing that his feeling remained, he was excited for what was to come. Thinking about how his luck had finally begun to reverse, Damien continued to descend.